So I think I'm highly impressionable, and I also have a memory of a frog. But I just finished reading Ray Dalio. It would be my book recommendation of the week.
Love
Ray
him.
Dalio with principles, like just a brilliant, brilliant guy, incredibly affluent, incredibly successful. But his last book that's just come out is How Countries Go Broke, the Big Cycle. And so it's a systems approach to failure on a macro level. So like the industry, the connections. If you're going to apply this to musculoskeletal space and a payment reform, that we can, I guess, call this episode How Physical Therapy Goes Broke, the Big Cycle. It's applied to systems under pressure that are now starting to actually show vulnerability under this pressure. And without naming names, there's a significant financial write-off from one of the larger systems that is occurring because the payers and the financiers are having a difficult time continuing to feed these systems when the systems are not generating the expected return. And so this is not just profit garnishing. This is organizations under distress. And once they're under distress, like there's a pretty easy formula to calculate, and you can see the trajectory of this distress, especially if you're a student of history, and especially if you're a student of systems thinking, that this is the first signs of larger level reorganization and restructuring that we're going to probably see in the next 2 to 3 years.
I'm going to point to something coming up, which is one of my very favorite times of year when the multi-thousand page physician fee schedule is proposed rule is put out. And we can guess at some of what we might see in it. One of the things I think we might see, listening to CMS talk a lot over the past months and years, is trying to do more value-based care policy directly in fee-for-service and not just in alternative payment models. So I'll tell you why this is relevant. Stick with me. Something was added to the physician fee schedule called the Advanced Primary Care Management Codes a couple of years ago. It was under the Biden administration, and that allows a monthly billable code for a set of services. So think services that kind of wrap around those team-based care services. There's interest in potentially adding to those. So for listeners, start to think about advanced primary care as a concept also becoming a billable service, the advanced primary care team being reimbursed directly for a wide swath of services that get categorized as primary care. Right now, if we don't insert ourselves, primary care consists of the behavioral health providers and then all your medical providers and then the teams that support them providing things like chronic care management. If we start to see more and more funding dollars going towards primary care and now starting to define primary care more formally and fund it more directly as a set of services. We've talked to this theme before that money has to come from somewhere. It's a closed system, right? So that means everyone outside of primary care that bills Medicare Part B, we're going to see the money move more towards primary care potentially and less to specialty care. And right now we are bucketed really under the specialty care category. There's also, this is down the line, but the model tests, right, in accountable care organizations, they're in sort of indirectly, somewhat directly testing how successful quality and cost of care are when we pay a monthly capitated amount to that advanced primary care team, right? This is a theme, right? We know this, but that is practiced in these innovation center models like ICO Reach and the new LEAD model coming. But then once that's tested, that can be made permanent, but also Congress can directly act on that information and make a permanent change to statute. So there things that get floated around are things like, let's do all primary care services are going to be paid at X rate, a capitated rate of, let's say, 10 to 15 or more % as a minimum starting point. Now, nothing like that is ready for prime time, but if I was predicting the future, I think we are 4 to 6 years away from seeing payment in Medicare being a team-based primary care payment and funded at a higher level, since we're at a pitiful 4 or 5% compared to other countries at 10, 12, 15%.
So to align this to like a larger system approach, and to align this to the structure from Ray Dalio's work, right? So
Hmm.
there are two cycles. There's a short-term cycle and a long-term cycle, and I think he's prolific about describing a short-term cycle about banks to leverage the loans, which is the 5 to 8 year cycle. So what you were saying, the 4 to 6 year cycle on Medicare and central federal payer side, and then there's a long-term cycle, which is that 50 to 100 year cycle that usually it is much more on a large governance side, which we probably should focus on too, because I think the long-term cycle in a healthcare through the current iteration is coming to that maturity too, considering that modern healthcare is about 75 years old, like in the current iteration. Like we're not bleeding people and putting leeches on wounds, or we are, but not to the same extent. So if you converge the short-term cycle in the MSK space and the federal payment system in the MSK space to the larger healthcare system in the current modern iteration, where you have a system with employer-based coverage and a federal coverage and Medicare reform and all this stuff, it's a system that's being readjusted because the obligations are not getting the outcome or the output that they were designed to do, and so that puts more pressure on the system, right? Like, and that's why potentially we're seeing these levers being applied to maybe accelerate or decelerate change. And so, how does this change look in our space? Because I know you and I are prolific about talking about these models that are coming in, the models with abbreviation. But do you forecast these models being of exponential importance towards change for the larger system, or do you see them as being more of a superficial overlay?
I see these less now as models and more of a revolution in healthcare.
Hmm.
Because this cycle, what we're talking about, like, what's this cycle? Is this maybe a 4 to 6 year shorter term cycle? This cycle of paying for healthcare in the way we do began like less than 100 years ago, 80, 85 years ago. And, it's been a test. It's gone through the cycles of people's life expectancy being shorter and not having as many interventions that you could do, and healthcare being simpler, and not the burgeoning population that we now have that requires thinking differently. And now with a population with rampant chronic conditions, from there's a whole host of reasons why people look different now than they did 50 years ago, and the chronic disease epidemic, et cetera. So we can't pay for healthcare and incentivize healthcare the way we did 70 years ago, because it's not working. And we're starting to see a crumbling of the system where there's just not enough dollars to go around. We never have enough to continue to increase reimbursement for healthcare providers. So something has to change. And the momentum is all towards the direction I just described before. We've got to shift towards team-based advanced primary care, more prevention, and slowly shift away from this reactive intervention focused chronic care, acute care type of system.
So thinking on that note, and again, going to the historical narrative, if you look into that, how pressure applied to the system on a macro scale, on a countrywide scale, what are some of the levers that systems do or react to this revolutionary change? And it's interesting, we need to discuss the two aspects, the dichotomy of evolution or revolution. Is that do you want to revolt or do you want to evolve? And is there capacity to evolve, or is the system so far gone that we just need a complete overhaul and revolution where you need to break things up to start all over? Or is there still a potential to evolve an existing system into something that's functional and operational for the next 100 years, which is change mitigation? But the four ways, the four levers to change is, one is just austerity, which is rationing, right? Like and you see some of that applied in healthcare, where austerity is real now, and austerity on a provider side too, because speaking from my lens, austerity from a limited supply of time. We don't have enough time, so we have 2 to 4 week wait period for access of healthcare. We don't have the ability to provide the right mode of care, and we have a mismatch of access points from digital and in-person systems based on availability of these resources. The other part is to look into that restructuring and defaults, and these large healthcare and MSK providers that are starting to default on their financial responsibilities. They just can't make payments anymore. They can't sustain their payroll because they're not getting enough revenue coming in to sustain a payroll, or they can't invest into innovation and the structure. The third path would be that wealth transfer, which is also something you're seeing, because the wealth transfer right now, like I was just at Hinge Health conference, that is an example of wealth transfer. It's an organization that is able to demand or able to collect $6 billion from investors based on a promise of a viable delivery system without a proven fact. Like, I know it's controversial, but I don't think it's a system that's proven yet. But it's a system that's being evaluated as much higher valuation than a existing legacy system. And then the fourth part is just saturation or inflation or monetization or whatever you want to call it, which is uh, you have others that are starting to take cross your border and take your property. So you have athletic trainers, you have others that are coming in and saying like, well, we can play on this turf, we can take this. So that's actually very interesting observation on a large scale applied to the small scale. So what do you think about this evolution or revolution? Do we need to revolt and just break things up and build things again, or can we evolve existing system? Is there anything that's of value that's worth keeping into the next iteration of our healthcare model?
I mean, the things that clinicians do that, can't be done first by, let's say, technology or by others, right? We have physical therapists background and training is very much centered on the medical model, and some PTs provide care that is maybe a little bit more, newer age, and some provide more traditional services. It's PT is still centered in and grounded in medical care to support the medical system. We're part of the medical team. The part of that we're the experts at that few aren't, like Chad talked about, and others before him, is our ability to connect and motivate patients and do like pick up the pieces that others really don't have the scope or the time to do. And those things you can't take away from the therapy profession. I think it's though going to be difficult for especially some therapists more than others to come to terms with where our unique value lies that cannot be replaced by others. But the other replacing that, we lots of debate about, but there is going to be a change in how care is delivered because of AI. And, remember, AI is the worst it's ever going to be is today.
Mm-hmm.
So its capabilities are only getting more and more rich, and their ability to improve the right care at the right time is going to come for us, right? As there's interoperability is accelerating, as data is being shared between stakeholders, we're not far off from, the various stakeholders, our referring providers, our co-managing providers and other parts of the system, payers, to be able to extract right from our EMR at what we're doing and the outcomes that we're getting and judge how valuable or invaluable we are. AI is able to be a front door to a lot of care. And we have to find a way to integrate that both into the system of how we deliver care in our clinics and wherever else, and be able to integrate that into the how we provide care and how we plan out our work days. And a fundamental change to the way our day-to-day practice happens is coming. It's not likely going to look, too much like it does now in the future, but it doesn't mean our skill sets change. It means that we're going to have to flex them and prioritize them in different ways, leaning into the things that give us unique value.
AI is really an interesting, very interesting label. And I think that one of the best ways to appreciate this, and this is fresh off the press. So Eric Topol, he's a mensch, but he just posted an article on Twitter that I quickly downloaded and read, which looked into from Nature Medicine 2026 that looked into the frontier models performance against medically trained models. So he looked into the Gemini 3.1, the ChatGPT 5.2, and Claude, or not him, but the article, against open medicine, against other specifically medically trained closed systems. And what was found is that these open, democratized frontier models outperformed these closed medical only models. Maybe there's just enough contextual knowledge that's necessary to create better decision. But what do we do with this data? So how does this AI precision help us I think these are the guardrails. These are the specific parameters that help us align with providing better quality care. You still need a human to execute, but AI can help you execute better. And we as clinicians need to embrace these systems because you no longer can afford ambiguity, but you're still providing ambiguity. And sooner or later, the consumer himself or herself are going to choose a more precise model of care based on the availability of these resources. So, as a clinician, and hopefully the whoever's listening, explore the systems that are available to you and use systems ethically, obviously, with full compliance for patient data privacy, but use these systems to help you develop a better plan of care. Use these systems to help you understand disease projection or musculoskeletal involvement projection over time based on individual. And that, look, just to put it in context, I just spoke to my team where I see patients in regards to tissue specific recovery trajectories. And so collagen, tendon, bone, muscle, each has a unique independent recovery trajectory based on a state of health and based on a clinical involvement that should be counted in months and sometimes years. This tissue remodeling cycle takes months and years. Episode of care takes days or weeks. There's a misalignment, and the mismatch is that what we are doing in the clinical side is we are contributing to habituation of symptomology, which is we work with patients until they start to feel better, and then we consider that to be a successful intervention, and we send the patient home. But we don't ever take people to the point where they are starting to create change on a tissue level. And because of that, these patients tend to come back, and that tends to create extra episode of care. So, how do you use a large language model? Well, by simply learning to prompt it to give you better insight about the disease process. So, I think AI is a game changer for positive, for legacy providers, for in person providers. It's a game changer for people who are working with patients because that's where you need to be. You need to work and explore. And yet, what do we see? Do we see a large uptake of these systems? Probably not. So let's go back then to the payment reform. So how do you see these systems, or like if we're going to be an AI, impacting payment reform?
So yeah, payment reform will be impacted by AI. I'll get to that in a second. I wanted to make one note when you were talking about, plans of care and using AI. This is what I would expect in the shorter term. You as the PT put together a plan of care after your evaluation, and you work with the patient, you align with them on shared decision making, whatever it is, your process. And an educated, time constrained consumer of PT can leave and put into ChatGPT on their phone. Here are my symptoms. Here's my complaint. Here's what the PT's plan was. Here's how often they want to see me. What do you think about that plan? It could be that quick. And so imagine when I was treating, I would think about, if anybody were to review this plan, is this the absolute evidence-based best way I can manage this care plan the most efficiently, high value way, where I enable that patient a longitudinal positive trajectory for their whatever the condition is. But now, we have patients can just check with AI. And, I think we underestimate how quickly people are getting comfortable, and including seniors, with AI. I think the access model digital health will be a big test of that. But I project it'll be, it's going to be more than most people realize, how interested folks are in other options, especially when other parts of the healthcare ecosystem start to recognize that these other options work, or work for some patients. So, something to keep in mind. Now, AI and payment models, I would say one of the things that AI is going to do is it's going to make it easier for payers to determine what the anticipated spend of a type of patient is going to be. So AI will make it easier to be more precise, and transparency goes through the roof. Patient safety, overutilization, all of those things, the ability to map a patient's intervention like PT, map that to its value over time. AI, rapidly increases the ability to do that at scale.
So that system where AI gauges value over time and AI gauges the actual output and evaluates output against a specific benchmark based on its quality and completion. And then you look into that as a risk propagation, and you look at it as a risk as a one-sided risk or a two-sided risk. And so right now the system is designed to be a one-sided risk factor, right? Or accessibility, because on the other side of that two-sided risk is
Hmm.
that payers have a direct responsibility to the consumers that they're covering or to the subscribers that they're covering. And if the payers are not willing to take on that risk
Hmm.
of increasing access, increasing engagement, increasing participation and utilization, they too should have a payment risk or financial risk associated with these shortcomings. And so again, like the simplest form is that 65% of the United States is undercovered for orthopedic and musculoskeletal problems. So we tend to have this monoptic view of musculoskeletal system being overcovered living in a large urban area. At least I do in the Chicagoland area. So there's a PT clinic on every corner. There's a clinic on every corner. There's a hospital on every corner. But that's not the reality in the United States. And part of it is that the payers have made a conscious effort of saturating these large urban markets because these markets are wealthy, and depriving smaller rural markets because these markets are not as wealthy.
Of course, we have a real access problem because of literally lack of providers in a safe distance for and doable distance. But when it comes to more urban areas, when you hear about a lot of issues with access, the devil's really in the details. Some things related to access are because of too many repetitive visits. For example, if we just stick to PT, is it because we're seeing patients potentially more than they need to be, so we cannot open up access more quickly to new patients because we don't have the capacity? Is it because we can't hire and retain enough PTs that are willing to stay in the profession, feel satisfied, are able to be a PT for decades potentially? You know, so is some access a problem because we're closing facilities or clinics because they can't survive on their low fee for service rate, which is originally what caused that frequency utilization, because much more of the population needs conservative MSK care than gets it. But are we as providers contributing in some places to reducing access because of volumes of care being given to individual patients rather than being able to reach more of the population? That becomes a real issue when we talk about, also for those we don't talk a lot about skilled nursing, but it becomes an issue in that area too. Like in some parts of the country, not enough skilled nursing for post acute, but is part of that because there's not an efficient throughput of patients going in, staying for a reasonable amount of time and discharging appropriately when length of stay longer is incentivized in skilled nursing. So how much of the access problem is because there's no available beds because of volume of services? So access is like I said, a really interesting issue, and regulations will catch up at some point to be able to independently handle the easiest things, right? Renewing prescriptions, we're already seeing that in Utah, but being able to provide the simplest care and know when to escalate, and their ability to be empathetic. And it's hard to say with a straight face that AI is empathetic, but it is. And so that feeds the consumer of healthcare's interest in continuing to engage first with a digital AI agent. There's going to be bumps here.
That makes sense. But then the only objective pushback I can see to this is that the directional error of access and the supply chain breakdown from clinicians not wanting or not having space is that by design, that there were not the right string of incentives that were available that kept the
Hmm.
clinicians in their rural spaces. The same as
Yes.
orthopedic surgeons, or 30% of orthopedic surgeons are migrating towards urban areas. The larger systems, larger organizations, better reimbursement, potentially better caseload or better specialization or ability to specialize. What is the directionality of it? Like it's a system that has been designed maybe to drive that type of market
It
situation.
has.
So then how do you create a more bidirectional causal error so that causality is divided equally between both sides?
It is not just do this and we're going to fix the problem. It's going to be driven by necessity and by organically proving that something new works. So for example, no matter what you think about or we think or can imagine AI is going to be capable of doing in medicine, people are doing it anyway. So no matter what, it's happening. But when access is limited because there's not enough humans, at what point can we really argue back that AI access as a front door is better than zero access? And that's when it begins to be tested and we can see the proof points or not that it works. And once it's proven, you can't really refute it. CMS looks at the same thing when they look at payment structure. Or is our payment rule going to impact access to care because providers leave Medicare? Same idea. But are they going to allow AI at some point? I don't know when, but I would guess yes. Are they going to allow AI to contribute to network adequacy for a payer? You could certainly see a world in the future where that's possible, right?
What would be the mechanism of AI controlling that network advocacy, and what would it look like on a consumer side and a provider side?
On the consumer side, think about something like convenient care or urgent care or the base level primary care, where primary care network adequacy, at what point can it be met by one physician and AI bots that are extending the reach of that physician, that one physician, and that AI is an expert at escalating the right patients to get that primary care. And then you have a more specialized primary, secondary care team that's providing more complex, chronic disease management types of things in that primary care space versus your traditional prevention, primary care, convenient care, urgent care, right? So can you meet that convenient primary care adequacy requirement? Just pulling something out of a hat here, but things like hospital at home. Does hospital at home contribute to network adequacy for hospitals? Does telehealth contribute to network adequacy on its own when it's in addition to other care? So
Yeah.
access. Who knew we'd be talking about access on this episode?
Right. Everything goes back to access. It's the atlas that holds the world. Access is the atlas that is holding the globe upright.
Yes.
I think one caveat about AI is that AI is still a conventional tool that is designed by rules that are conventionally driven. So you always have a degree of risk of conventional bias because these tools, whoever the designer is going to be chartered by a system to create these algorithms then to be applied to the structure and logic of care provision. So trust is an important factor. So when a AI is making these existential decisions on a provider behalf, the trust is based on the design and logic of these rules. When it's a system or hospital system based or a payer based, the same logic applies. So because AI is a conventional instrument that is designed by humans, how do you keep the risk of bias and the risk of negative response from overwhelming the system?
It's impossible for me to know at what point we make the leap from it's just augmentative to be safe and then define safe versus when is there a level of autonomy. And I again heard this example. I've probably heard it 5 times. Pardon everybody who's heard it before, but the Waymo example, it's never had a fatality. It
Hmm.
ran over a cat, which is horrible, but thousands of animals are run over every day by drivers, physical drivers. I have never been in one, but I haven't heard anybody say that was a terrible experience. People generally like it a lot. So the criticism is, oh, it hit a cat or it gets stuck in a U-turn, let's say. Well, it's being perfected, obviously, but its safety profile is way superior. And what do we know about safety of medicine? It's like really crummy.
Iatrogenesis is immense. The single greatest cost to a preventable cost to a consumer is iatrogenesis. So the fact that
Mhm.
these systems have the ability to segmentally standardize care is absolutely there. The key is again that there's two phases to AI design. There's the training phase and the tuning phase. And I think that what I was referencing before is the training being conventional. There's always going to be an innate degree of bias about how the training is actually designed. But the architecture of the training is always at risk for being infiltrated by personal gains. The tuning part is much more interesting because the tuning, like the Waymo that gets stuck on a U-turn or kills a cat, is a tuning problem because the Waymo may have not recognized the cat's color or cat's speed or the trajectory of cat's advancement, and therefore there's no more cat. But the tuning is has to do with exposure and design, which is that the tuners of these models are going to be the providers on site, and our ability to embrace these models into our clinical setting is going to help us tune the system to be more advantageous for us as a professionals and providers. So yeah, it's an interesting. These are the interesting times, aren't they, Dana? So
You could say that. It's a very interesting time, but I'm generally an optimist, and I predict the job of a PT will become more rewarding. Therapists will feel that the care that they provide is the care that they learned to provide in school, that it's very patient specific, that it is more individualized in a way that's not as easy to do without AI, and combine that with interoperability accelerating. It is going to plug PTs into the rest of the healthcare delivery system, the medical system. I'm not saying, oh, a lot of the things that we do that aren't directly related to traditional Medicare medical care, but I think it's going to plug us into that system more. And boy, that's what I hope. Since the day I graduated, it's driven me crazy that the value of PT has not been realized by the rest of the healthcare ecosystem for 1,000 reasons that all
yeah,
came together, and now we're here. And
and
now we can take this AI as a catalyst. This profession can change for the better. And if we go with it and we provide excellent care as we do, we can prove that our value is beyond the value that payers are reimbursing us for now.
yeah, it's interesting, all right? The point of context for any provider that's listening to this that has not really expanded the knowledge base beyond that micro meso level of clinical care. Your highest reimbursing code is your initial evaluation code that reimburses between $90 and $100 depending on the system. The second highest reimbursing code is therapeutic exercise and neuromuscular reeducation. Again, it fluctuates between 30 and 35. Why do you think the system rewards evaluation at a such much higher level than the next code? And why are we not embracing the need for higher level triage, for higher availability and accessibility of
Mhm.
care to the eval, rather than continuing to over deliver care and a lower value output instead of designing a team-based models where once you perform an evaluation, you can have somebody else do the actual care delivery and you focus on evaluation, you focus on your highest top of license skill set. The good thought to leave whoever listens
Mhm.
to this is that what maybe my system design of delivery care can be improved, and therefore my revenue production can improve if I just design myself to be more readily available for patients that need formal evaluation rather than patients that need customer service and handholding.
AI, just building right on that as a last thought, AI using, thank God, the wonderful research that folks like Trevor Lance and Chad Cook and all the other thank you researchers doing work in therapy. AI will be able to surface for anyone, for patients, for consumers, for other healthcare practitioners, will be able to surface therapy is the next best step for this patient, and here's why. And by the way, we also looked at these 3 clinics in the area over these 5 are showing the best outcomes over 3, 6, and 9 months. Think about that. We will be seeing a much higher percentage of the population. Maybe they'll go through a digital front door first, and maybe that's where our evaluation begins, for example. The weight of the evaluation is so heavy because that is where the highest level evaluative work, the work that only a PT can do, and come up with a rehab diagnosis and a prognosis and work that plan specifically for your patient. That's hard cognitive work that only we can do. So we should be doing a whole lot more of that. When there's others that can do what we do, once a plan is established, like our assistant partners, they should be doing that. Embrace that. That's step one. And you're getting ready then for the revolution that is coming.
Hmm. Or you can continue as is and continue to use your paper charts and use your goniometer for range of motion assessment. So yeah,
I never liked those goniometers anyway.
no, no. I think that there's definitely a next step is here, but we we need to spend time preparing the workforce for this next step. We need to create a system that actually can be applied based on your level of readiness, which is what should happen in an ideal state. Or what was most likely going to happen is that the system is just going to change, and any laggards are going to be left behind providing their niche services that will not be able to access the reimbursement system, and it will have to only create a cash for service reimbursement, which is okay if as long as it's not the exclusive way of participating in healthcare. Or they're gonna have to leave the field. That they're not gonna be able to participate in healthcare. So yeah, that's a lot to think about. Always perfect to shoot the shit.